welcome back to Midland Public Library's Easy Embroidery program. As always, my name is Jennifer Whip, and I'm the Make Your Place Coordinator here at MPL. Today, we're going to be learning how to embroider words. Yay! I'm going to show you how to embroider letters in different fonts. And what I mean by that is I'm going to show you how to embroider letters in different stitches, using some of the stitches that we've already learned, as well as a new stitch. You're going to need your piece of fabric, and I'm actually going to take it out of the hoop for the first part of today's lesson. You'll need your needle and floss. You're going to want either your marker, or you can use a pencil for this one if you'd like. You're going to need the font tracers that I put in your kits, but you are not tied to these. Feel free to use different fonts on your own computer and play around with that however you like. You can also just do your own handwriting. These are optional. And then I will be using a light up desk, which I assume not everybody has one of these, so you will probably want some Scotch tape and a window. Okay, let's get started. So I'm going to start by taking my fabric out of its hoop and getting it ready. Voila. Next, I'm going to choose the word that I want to try to embroider out of all of the font tracers here. So I chose kind of a medium size. I'm going to do the word love, because why not? And then so for you, what you're going to do is tape it onto your window so that you can trace over it. I'm going to trace it onto my light up desk so that I can actually show you the process. Let's do it. Okay, so I have my light up desk here. I'm going to start, I'm just going to take Scotch tape and tape this guy down so it doesn't move while I'm trying to trace. Voila, all set. Okay, then I'm going to take my fabric and I'm going to put it over the word, hoping you can see that I can see right through it. That's great. So it's at this stage that you can either trace with your marker or you can trace it with a pencil as well. Obviously, if you trace it with a pencil, it's going to be finer, so it'll be thinner lines that you'll be embroidering over, which can be good if you are finding that you're pretty good at staying on the lines. When you embroider over top of the pencil, you won't be able to see it. If you're going to do thicker words that are going to stand out a little bit more off of your fabric, then maybe you want to go for your marker because it will just be a thicker line. Choice is totally up to you. I've also seen this done directly on a computer screen. So if you, instead of using kind of the old-fashioned method of tracing using light from a printed piece of paper, if you find a font on your computer that you prefer, you can just put your fabric over top of your computer screen and trace that way. You just have to be gentle on your computer screen. So let's get started. I'm going to trace that word love. I'm kind of just using my marker to fill in the parts that are a little bit thicker on the font for that first one there, for that L, and then I'm gonna just keep it pretty simple for the rest of the letters. Okay. So all said and done, there is the word love on my fabric, and you can see that the L has some thicker parts and some thinner parts, which is great because I'm going to show you how to fill those in. And then we have the O, V, and E. So let's put that back in our hoop and we'll get started learning to embroider those letters. Okay, so I'm going to leave the L for last because it's the more complicated, but we're going to start with the O, and we're going to just do a back stitch. And if you remember, the back stitch looks like this. So you're just do a first stitch here. You come up a stitch length away. And you go back down into that same hole that you came up. And we just keep doing that over and over again across the line. So I'm gonna come up at the start of my letter here. I'm gonna start actually right here. So you can kind of just start wherever you like, wherever a natural starting point looks like for you. So let's see, if I was to actually be doing this, I would start, yeah, so let's start right at the top here. So I kind of am just starting where I would start to write the actual letter. So I'm gonna go a stitch length away. Great. Come up a stitch length away. I'm gonna try and be very careful and stay right on my lines. And I'm gonna go back down in that same hole that I went down before. And I'll come up another stitch length away. And go back down in that same spot as before. And I will come up a stitch length away. And go back down. And I'm going to do that all the way around the outside of my L, or of my O. Okay, and then I'm going to do this little inside part that loops down and around. And you might notice I left a tiny little space right there almost for this guy to go through so that it'll look like when I was actually writing the letter, it overlaps there. Okay, so there is my O done in a back stitch. And so next I'm going to show you how to do what's called the whipped back stitch. And so to do that, I'm going to do the next letter, this V, also in a back stitch, and then there's an extra step that you do afterwards. So let's do that. Okay, so there is my V done in a back stitch. And so the part that makes this a whipped back stitch is that what we're actually gonna do is we're gonna go back and we're gonna kind of weave our needle through. So let me just change my floss over and I will show you what I mean. All right, so I'm gonna start by coming up pretty much right where my first stitch came up on this V. Up like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to thread it through my first back stitch there. And I'll pull it through like so. Then I'm going to cross it over, cross my thread, my floss over, and then I'll go through the next back stitch. Don't want to catch that. Oh, there we go. Go through the next back stitch and pull it through. Then I cross my thread over and I find my next back stitch and I go through it. And I'm just going to keep doing this all the way around my V, remembering to be coming from the same side every time. So I cross that over and I go through the next back stitch. And so I actually had to start turning my my work here to maintain consistency with the direction. So I cross it over and I go through the next back stitch. All right, then I cross it over and go through the last back stitch. And then I'm just gonna go back down pretty much in the same spot I went down for the last time. And pull that all the way through. And so that is the whipped backstitch. So basically what we've done is we've created this beautiful, I don't even know what you call it, twisty. We've twisted all the way around our backstitch there, and I think it makes it look a little bit more finished and a little more polished, but you know, to each their own, it's whatever your preference is. So that is the whipped backstitch next to the backstitch. All right, for the last letter here, this E, we're going to do the stem stitch. So if you recall, I'll do a quick demo of the stem stitch for you. The stem stitch looks like this. So you come up, you go back down, but you leave a loop. And I should go a little bit further than that. You go back down. You leave a loop and you come up in the center on the line. Then you pull it tight. You leave another loop, go a stitch away, and come back up on the same spot that you went down before. Go another stitch length away, leave your loop, come back up in that same spot as before, right? And so that is your stem stitch. I'll just go back down and finish that off. So a stem stitch is a really common one for lettering when you're embroidering. I think it's just because it looks pretty and it gives almost the same effect as the whipped backstitch does, but without having to go over it for a second time, because it still has that almost twisty braided look. So yeah, let's try it. So I'm gonna come back up right next to my L, or my V. And I'm gonna go a little further than that. Up there. Go back down. I remember to leave my loop, right? And then for that first stitch, you do come back up in the middle of your loop on the line and then close that loop off, right? So then we make another loop, we move it back or a stitch length away and go down on the line, hold that loop, and come back up where we went down the last time. And I'm just gonna keep, because I want my stitch to go in the same direction, so I'm just gonna keep turning my work here along with me. And so when you get to this part, it is totally fine to just go right over top of what you're working on. Because if you were writing, you'd be going over top of that with your marker, right? So you can just go right over top of it, treat it like it's not even there. And then just do the same thing you've been doing before, where you leave your loop, you come up in the middle, on the line, close that loop off. So there is my E done with a stem stitch. One of the things I noticed right away is that the hole, the loop in the center here, didn't really stay so I could see it. It kind of closed off. And so if I was going to do a font this size again, I might consider breaking my floss and separating it into, 3 and 3 so that I can have a little bit more detail in my E here. I can see it a little bit better. But ultimately, when you're doing letters, it's really just about doing the same stitch that we learned to do on those straight lines and following the curves of your letters. So my key tip is just to maintain consistency with the direction of your stitches. So now let's move on to how to fill in this L here. All right, moving on to the L. So when you have letters that have thicker parts and thinner parts, how do you tackle that? So basically what you're gonna do is, and I'm gonna fill this in with a back stitch, is I'm gonna do a single back stitch on the parts that are thinner. And then on the parts that are thicker, I'll do a back stitch on the outside of each side of the thicker part. So I'll do a back stitch here and a back stitch on this part. Then back down to a single here, and then a back stitch here on the outside and a back stitch here on the outside, and then back down to a single. And then the part in the middle, you just fill in with a back stitch. So basically we're gonna just back stitch this whole thing until it's filled in. So let's try it. Okay, so I'm getting to the part where it's thicker, so I'm gonna pick a side to continue my back stitch down. So I'm gonna do it on, maybe I'll do it on the inside. Do it on the inside. I'm just doing it right on the very edge of that letter. And I come back down. Okay, so I've done the entire kind of inside to outside loop there, so I'm gonna just start doing this part right here that's thicker and this part right in here that's thicker and go back along the outside edge. And so you can see immediately that there's going to be a spot where I have to fill in right there, and that's totally fine. All right, so I've got the outside of my L all done, so I've done the outline of it basically. So now I'm going to just use my back stitch to fill in those middle parts there. And it doesn't have to be perfect too. That's the other thing to keep in mind. Okay, so there is my L all said and done and filled in. And so I used all 6 strands of floss for this. If I was to do, again, a letter this size, I would break my floss into 3 and 3. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put some pictures in at the end here just to kind of show you what the lettering can look like when you do all 6 strands with a larger letter. So if I was doing something that was much bigger, you know, if I'm doing an H-E-L-L-O here, you'll be able to see the fine detail in here. And it looks pretty cool. So I'll also put some pictures in of what that actually looks like. But anyway, that is how you fill in a letter using the backstitch. That's how you do a single letter using the backstitch, the whipped backstitch, and of course the stem stitch. So that is how you embroider different fonts and letters. All right, a couple quick notes before I go today. So you just saw me use basically 3 stitches to do 4 letters, but you can use any stitches that I've taught you or ones that you've come across to embroider words. So that could be a split stitch or the chain stitch or any other stitch that you like, and you'll just end up with a bit of a different effect on your letters. So you're just gonna look a little bit different and more personalized. So, you know, pick your favorite stitch and run with it. Okay, secondly, I just want to talk for a second about the back of your project. When I'm practicing, I don't really pay much attention to the back of my project. I just kind of jump around from, you know, flower to font to stitch or whatever, just because I'm practicing, and that's totally fine during that stage. However, when you come to do, you know, your final project or a piece that you want to give to somebody or that you want to be really proud of, it doesn't matter if your back is messy necessarily. You just need to be careful about what color fabric and floss combinations you're using. So in the back of mine, you can see that my floss zigzags all over the place. But when you look at it, you can see that zigzagging shining through. Like you can see it, especially when I hold it up to the window. I guess you guys can't see that, but you can see the zigzags, right? I think you can see it like that. And that's because I'm using a light fabric and a dark floss. So for your final project, when you do, you know, a bullion rose like this, and then you're gonna move on to a satin stitch flower, tie off that rose first, get a new piece of floss, and then move on to your second element, your lettering or whatever you're doing, so that you don't end up with these zigzaggy lines connecting all of your pieces in the back. Or if you're using a dark piece of fabric, you might be okay. It's just something to think about so that you don't end up being able to see all the craziness on the back, and it'll really neaten up the back of your project as well. All right, finally, I wanted to talk about floss. So I'm hoping by now that you have tried some different stitches and some different flowers and leaves and things using different thickness of floss, using a different number of strands. So if you're doing something that's really intricate and is really fine, I'm hoping you're using, you know, 1, 2, or maybe even 3 strands of your floss. And if you're doing something that you really want to stand out and be thick and powerful, then you're using maybe 4, 5, or 6 strands. Play around with that and learn what you like best, what aesthetic you prefer, so that when you're doing the final project, you can follow that and you'll be happy with the outcome. Okay, as always, if you aren't done with your lettering and you want to learn more, check the video description. I've put some links to some different resources that are going to teach you some new things, so check those out. Next week, we're gonna be starting the final project. Woo! I'm really excited because up until this point, pretty much everything I've done has just been practicing and playing around. So I can't wait to have, you know, a final piece that I can show people and be proud of. So the video will be released on December 7th at 4 p.m. and we're gonna start working away on that final project. So be ready for that. You know, tune in and learn along with me as we do every week. Thank you for joining me for another week of MPL's Easy Embroidery, the program where we make this beautiful art form so simple. I'll be back again next week to start work on that final project, so I'll see you then. Bye, Midland.